Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to my channel. My name is Hira, and today in this video we'll talk about the 18th century of the history of English literature. So previously we have discussed the Anglo-Saxon period, the Norman conquest, the Renaissance era, the Jacobean and the Caroline age, and now we are discussing the 18th century, and before 18th century we have even discussed the restoration period. So basically in the 18th century it starts from 1700s to 1798. So in the meanwhile, we even in the 18th century, Augustan literature even is included, and then there is the age of sensibility, which is also known as the age of enlightenment, the age of reason. So by the end of 17th century restoration period and at the start of the 18th century, the Augustan age, Queen Anne ruled over England by this time, and the writers of this era had a profound interest in classical writers or works in Greek and Latin. Originality of thoughts were not given importance, and perfection of literature was more of their concern. Okay, so there was a very important writer, Jonathan Swift, who wrote A Battle of Books and then A Tale of the Tub and then Gulliver's Travel. So he was an Irish writer and he focused on the satire. So his writings are more of the reflection of the society, never used to publish his names on his works, and his way of writing a satire was compared to a Roman satirist, Hannibal. He used to satire in writing political pamphlets. So while talking about prose, a society was formed known as a Tatler, and Richard Steele started it in 1706, where journalism was one of the important genre, and Joseph Addison. These two writers worked on prose. Later on, Tatler was replaced by Spectator. The name of the word Tatler, the name of the society, was changed into another word known as the Spectator. Another important writer of this era was Alexander Pope. He wrote an essay on criticism. It is a prose, and then Rape of the Lock, it's a poetry. An essay on criticism he wrote in 1711, and Rape of the Lock was written in 1712. So Augustan age was dominated by Jonathan Swift and Alexander Pope. In the previous ages, we have discussed that printing press was not very commonly used, and therefore printing press was now not under the government rule, and now it was free to use it as one wants to. So the printing got cheaper, and printing of the newspaper, literature and art got stability. The writers of this time got to know the power of journalism, and they started to bribe newspapers, and then less people were inclined towards religion. So now there was a clash between society and religion. But one advantage of a printing press was now the rates of the books were economical, and it produced a great number of readers. So now society was getting literate. Therefore 18th century this time was known as the age of enlightenment, to accept clear rational methods of reason. And the age of reason, politicians of this time used to snub or scold the writers, and writers used to highlight the flaws of the society, and it is also known as the age of scandal for this reason. So novels, plays and poetries were written in response or in criticism to another author's work. Okay, so now talking about the prose writing, so Joseph Addison, Richard Steele, Samuel Johnson even wrote, like he invented dictionary, and he spent kind of 9 years in forming it. So Daniel Defoe wrote Robinson Crusoe, it's a novel. Adam Smith, who is also known as the father of capitalism and the wealth of nations, so he incorporated the theory of moral sentiments. Then we have Jonathan Swift, who kind of portrayed satire in a prose style, and he wrote Gulliver's Travel. Alexander Pope wrote Rape of the Lock. Samuel Richardson wrote Pamela, it's a sentimental novel. Oliver Goldsmith, Lawrence Sterne, who wrote Sentimental Journey. Henry Fielding wrote Shamela, and Joseph Andrews and Thomas Somility. So now these authors used to do the satire on each other works. Like the work of Henry Fielding is similar to the work of Samuel Richardson. It consists of the same plot. So by the death of Jonathan Swift and Alexander Pope, people marked the end of this age, and then Samuel Johnson wrote Essential for the Age, and this age was also known as the Age of Sensibility. So in poetry writing, Alexander Pope, he used to label his enemies or foes as dunces, which is also known as fool or stupid person. So in this age, writers used to translate the classical works in this era where people only used to use the element of satire in their writing. There were two writers who used to wrote poetry by giving it a personal touch. For example, John Dyer, who wrote Gone Hills, and James Thomson, who wrote Winter. And then there was another poet, Thomas Gray, who was famous for his country churchyard. Like this is the famous poem of his, and this is elegy. This time other poets were known as the graveyards or the churchyard poets. And we have another personality important as well, Oliver Goldsmith. So talking about drama, the Licensing Act of 1737, drama got converted into melodrama, and no rules were implemented on it, just satire were presented. When we talk about drama, so Henry Fielding is an important writer of the drama. He's a dramatist. Samuel Johnson wrote a satire known as A Complete Vindication of Licensure of English State. Like he wanted to say that if any literary or piece of art goes into that censor and they eliminate any kind of art or the scene from that act or drama, it will lose its originality and the importance of it and the basic essence of it. So therefore Samuel Johnson wrote this satire on the vindication of the license of English state, that there should be no licensing act, and whatever people needs to write and they wish to write, they should write, because like this the originality of the work would die ultimately and the creativity would be vanished. Therefore, Henry Fielding left drama and became a novelist. So, William Shakespeare got popularity because old plays were played, since no one was interested to write as their creativity would be questioned by this time. So, this time the plays of Shakespeare got a huge hype. Talking about the key facts of this age, so we have a mock epic poetry, new classicism known as the classical literature follow, novel, like birth of novel through journalism, political critique was done through newspapers, printing technology became wide, and then there was the concept of journalism where people used to bribe the owners of the newspaper that they should publish their work instead of the another person. Let's give a look to the overview of the 18th century, whatever we have read so far. So let's see what you people have understood so far. Before 18th century, we have discussed the Anglo-Saxon period, the Norman conquest, the Renaissance era, the Jacobean and the Caroline age, the Restoration period, and the 18th century that consists of the Augustan age and the age of sensibility. There's an important quote of Jonathan Swift is that vision is the art of seeing what is invisible to others. So let's discuss the literature of the 18th century, talking about the novel. Jonathan Swift is an Irish writer and he focused on satire. He wrote several books known as Battle of Books, A Tale of the Tub, and Gulliver's Travel. Gulliver's Travel is one of the important work of this author. Then we have prose. Journalism was one of the important genre here. Richard Steele, Joseph Addison, these two writers worked on the society that was formed known as Tatler. Later on it was named as Spectator. So two important writers of the Augustan age were Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift. Printing press got cheaper, and in the 18th century it is known to be the age of enlightenment and the age of reason. People would only highlight the flaws of the society. Moving towards the prose writing, so here are the number of list of poets or the authors. Then we have the same plot which Oliver Goldsmith and Henry Fielding had a striking similarity between their plots, and by the end of Augustan age, like by the death of Jonathan Swift and Alexander Pope, people marked this age the end of the Augustan age, and then there was the start of the age of sensibility. So talking about the poetry writing, Alexander Pope wrote a poem known as Rape of the Lock, which mainly was based on the morality, virtue and religion. Then we have John Dyer, he wrote Cogger Hill. And then we have Thomas Gray, he was famous for his country churchyard. Towards the drama, so I have already discussed this thing that there was the Licensing Act. Therefore, the writers of that time stopped writing drama. So essential writers of this time were Henry Fielding, Samuel Johnson and Shakespeare. The works of Shakespeare were highlighted as no other writer was writing any of their creativity or art. So in the conclusion, this period also saw the emergence of several literary movements, and there was also the Gothic movement. Overall, this 18th century was the period of dramatic change and growth in English literature, paving the way for the emergence of new literary styles and themes in the centuries that followed. The key elements of this era were mock epic poetry, new classicism, and the birth of the novel through journalism. And talking about the journalism as a genre, so newspapers, political critique, and even pamphlets were written in response to it. Print technology and literature were published. So thank you so much for watching this video, and like, subscribe to my channel, share as much as you can. I would be enlisting all the other videos that are connected to this video, the previous video that in which we discussed all the other eras of English literature, and this marks the end of the history of English literature. I'll meet you guys in the next video. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz.